So good evening, everyone. Let's begin this evening's Dharma sharing with setting our motivation. So once again, trying to deepen our appreciation and our gratitude for this precious human life that through perhaps endless causes and conditions in prior life we have garnered for ourselves this life. So to rejoice, be grateful, be humbled by that opportunity, be inspired by that opportunity. And so while we have this precious human life, fleeting, for death is sure to come, and at what time we don't know, is to set our hearts and minds firmly on the intention to the best of our ability, to cultivate those qualities which garner all of the moments of this precious life as an opportunity for experiencing one perhaps in the future even better, more conducive to practicing the path. So we want to cultivate all the good qualities that will bring that about for us. Consecutive precious human rebirths are the best way to begin the quick and steady path to enlightenment. And generating those good qualities, cultivating wisdom, compassion, crucial. And simultaneously, or as best as we can, to then begin to consciously start to choose to abandon those things which keep us cycling around cyclic existence over and over again, experiencing birth, aging, sickness, and death, many times not having anything near a precious human rebirth. And to abandon those things which bring this continual, endless cycle of samsara, and to cultivate those qualities that will bring us not only these precious human rebirths like a stream of clear water, with the ultimate end to attain enlightenment so that all beings can be alleviated from this vicious cycle of suffering, to benefit them as best as we can. So let's use this opportunity this evening as Dharma friends to share what we understand about the Dharma for that purpose, to cultivate all good things, abandon all that brings suffering, for the purpose of Buddhahood, in order to bring all living beings along with us to that same supreme state. So Venerable is away this week, and once again, one of the Abbey monastics has a wonderful opportunity to share the Dharma, what they know, to the best of their ability. And so tonight I was going to do a very short sort of highlight of the past few weeks on the taking and giving practice, and then in thinking of what else I would like to share, I was going to share some of the previews of teachings to come, and how beautifully they interconnect with each other. So first, I don't know, I've been looking over my notes from the past few weeks, and this whole practice of taking and giving that Venerable has been sharing with us from Mind Training Like the Sun. I don't know why it took me a while to figure this out, but I noticed in my notes, and it's perfect and brilliant, is that Venerable spent a number of weeks teaching us on the giving aspect of the taking and giving practice. She didn't start with the taking of the suffering of sentient beings. She began with weeks of teaching us about the practice of giving. And the weeks went through the giving to ordinary beings in all the realms, the hell beings, the hungry ghosts, the humans, the animals, gods and demigods, the beings in the form and formless realms. How we give them our bodies, we give them worldly things, food, clothing, shelter, comfort, the Dharma, friendship, all of the things that will help them create the causes and conditions to have a precious human rebirth. And then she went on to teach us about giving to holy beings, which for me was quite a concept because I didn't think holy beings needed anything, but evidently they need, and how she explained it in some of them is to imagine being able to emanate as many bodies as possible and to be able to give those bodies to bodhisattvas in order that they can continue their work on the bodhisattva path, to the solitary realizers and the arhats and the stream enterers, to give them the Mahayana teachings, to help them to create the causes and conditions to receive the Mahayana teachings. And what it was, what I was getting a sense of is that, at least from my understanding, is that to cultivate the mind of generosity, to cultivate the virtue of giving, sets the mind into a much vast, and when you're thinking about giving to all sentient beings, all the holy beings, emanating countless bodies, giving things that you don't perhaps in physical life have, but to imagine multiplying them, it gets the mind into this creative, expansive kind of place. It makes the mind really vast. It makes the mind open. And it doesn't give the self-centered thought, which has a very different sense, which is more kind of small and tight and miserly and cheap and stingy, that this practice of giving, the self-centered thought has no place to sit. Kind of gets crowded out of the room by all this vast thinking. So I found that by Venerable teaching us on the giving aspect of the taking and giving, prepared our minds for then being able to even contemplate taking on the suffering of others. And the beauty of these teachings is that they're very practical, in that understanding sentient beings, we start small and we work our way gradually into bigger, greater, vaster capacity. So when Venerable started teaching on taking on the suffering, she began with us taking on our own suffering, taking on the suffering of tomorrow, taking on the suffering of future lives. Then she had us work into taking on the suffering of people that we feel close to, groups that we relate to, and then worked it on into taking the suffering of all beings in all the realms, including their afflictions, including their karmic imprints. So as the weeks went on, the taking on of suffering grew in capacity. So if you're following the teachings and practicing and taking them on the cushion and thinking about them, the mind, not that it can do this simultaneously, but it gets familiar with this wanting to grow, growing in capacity. And since for me the giving of the few weeks of giving got my mind a little bit more flexible, that when Venerable started talking about taking on the suffering, I wasn't trying to squeeze it into this small little self-centered mind that I usually live with. So I found the teachings, the way that they were presented, very helpful. And then she asked me to share a letter that she received from one of the inmates that she writes to and has been writing to for many years. And this is one of the most inspiring letters that I've read, because our friend in prison is doing exactly what the Tonglen practice is training us to do. And it's one thing to do it on the cushion, but as I read this letter, you will find out that he took it right off the cushion and put it right into a situation that was quite remarkable on how he held it and how it worked for him. So I'll read the letter first, and then I just have a few responses that came after I read it a few times. So of all the practices I've ever tried, Tonglen has had profound effects in my life. In particular, one of the emotions I have the most trouble with is fear. A lot of it is conditioned fear. I've lived my whole life in one kind of dangerous situation or another. I know, in fact, we all do in some way. Fear is just one of those emotions that can quickly move me from acting wisely to acting irrationally and in old ways. Tonglen has helped me more than anything else in those situations where I was feeling intense fear. One example was from a couple of years back. I had a friend who was being sexually exploited. I was walking with him one day, discussing with him his options of how to make it stop. He wasn't even quite sure he was going to make it stop at that point. As we walked and talked, he finally came to the point where he was just going to tell the guy that he had had enough and then walked off. Of course, you have dealt with prisons long enough to know that such a confrontation won't always end well. As we were walking, his friend came out to holler at him. Al did just what he said he was going to do. His friend quickly figured out that I was at fault for this sudden courage. While Alvin controlled his own mind, I just persuaded. Now his friend wanted to holler at me. I knew what that meant, at least I thought I did. I did my best, though, to not respond with my first reaction, which is to strike first. The whole time I was walking towards the guy, I was practicing Tonglen, taking from him his desire and greed, giving him what little virtue I had gained from my practice. I recited the Tara mantra as I did this. By the time I got over to the guy, I was calm, not feeling fight or flight. Of course, the exchange was heated. He threatened me in several ways, wanted me to pay him money for taking his boy, all of that. Alvin went on in and told the officer that his friend was out of bounds. The guy went to the hole and was eventually transferred. I never had to resort to violence, never even felt moved to that level of fear beyond the initial feeling that led me to practice Tonglen. In short, Tonglen helped me to react from a more spacious place, a place where I had options other than confrontation and aggression. In the end, it worked out well. Alvin wasn't getting exhorted anymore. The guy was transferred, and now Alvin is in a much safer camp working on his inner issues that led him to the situation in the first place, which was being abused as a kid and quickly identifying himself in that victim role. There are other examples of how Tonglen has helped me, though they are all similar to this. So when I read this this letter, I mean, I was so inspired by the fact that, first of all, prison, from the folks at the Abbey do a lot of prison correspondence, and we write letters to the inmates back and forth. And the stereotype of all inmates being monsters and being damaged goods and being useless and hopeless has, the stereotype is broken over and over again by the letters that we've received from the inmates. Those that meet the Dharma, and they come from very different venues. They come from Zen teachers, they come from Dharma friends, they come from Tibetan, they come from Thai, they come from all these different types of Buddhist traditions. Those that feel very connected and make strong karmic connections to the Dharma have used it like that one verse in 37 practices, like their hair, they practice like their hair is on fire. They use it for all these rather volatile, aggressive, unpredictable, oppressive situations. And they do it in the most clearest, profound, courageous ways. And this letter is just a sampling of some of the letters that we as Abbey residents get over the years that show how the practices of the Dharma, when taken off the cushion, practiced well, understood, contemplated, thought about, meditated on, becoming familiar with, is that to get to the point that you can walk into a situation like this, and the first thing you think of is taking and giving, rather than how am I going to get out of this situation or attack before I get attacked. So it's a perfect example of Tonglen, and it's also continually destroys these misconceptions that folks who are incarcerated are hopeless and have no capacity to change, no capacity to cultivate any good qualities. And it's worth really thinking about and taking to heart. So anyway, I just wanted to, Venerable wanted that letter to be shared because it's a perfect example of when the rubber hits the road. And so what I wanted to do now is to move into, there were 3 statements last week that Venerable made during the teachings that were put out as aspirations that I wanted to state, and then I wanted to work them in and weave them into this preview of teachings to come. So the first one came in 2 sentences, and I've read these over a number of times this week. The first one was, "May my mind be strong enough to take on the misery of the world." And even more specifically, I want to be able to deal with my self-centered thought, my moods, my afflictions, so that I may be able to take on the suffering of the world. And the reason that this strongly, it connected with me differently than many other things in the Dharma, which sometimes just go over my head, is this whole thing about I want to be able. And I find out that when I get stuck in my Dharma practice and I think it's dry and I'm doing it by rote and I'm spacing out about it, is that the intention, the wanting to free myself from suffering, the wanting to get out of my miserable state, my wanting and yearning for freedom from my own misery is lost. I've lost connection to that, because that's sort of the fuel that drives the engine. That's the water that fertilizes the seeds that I know are inside my own mind, but then just get caught up in just, well, we call it here at the Abbey, Venerable had said, there's a complacency. We're so saturated with the Dharma that at times I just get complacent about it, and I lose this wanting to free myself. And so this quote hit very strongly in a core of my mind this week that I needed to have sort of stirred up a little bit, is how badly do I want liberation? How badly do I want to free myself from my self-centered thought, my moods, my afflictions, in order to be able to take on the suffering of the world? Because as long as my body's filled up with afflictions and self-centered thought, there is absolutely no room to take on the suffering of others. And then the second statement that she made was, when suffering comes, if we imagine taking on the suffering of all living beings, our suffering does not seem that great. The sufferings I've had, I've gotten off pretty easy. And if I can't bear these small sufferings, how will I bear my death? So this was one of those that, for the complaining, whining, judgmental mind, the self-centered thought that takes all those little irritations, all those little sufferings, inconveniences, discontent, and makes them into these huge scenarios. This quotation has helped, because if we do that with the little things, when the really big thing arrives, which is our death, how are we going to be able to experience it in the moment with an open heart, with any sense of clarity, without terror arising immediately? And so putting small sufferings into perspective in order that we can take on the sufferings of all living beings, who for the most part have sufferings that are far greater, certainly, than my own. You know, whatever happens to me in this life so far is small compared to what I see in the news or what I hear of some of our Dharma friends experiencing. And so And so this is sort of the segue into the preview of the teachings that Venerable is going to give, is how to use those everyday samsaric misadventures to grow our minds, grow our courage, grow the vastness, so that we'll be able to do the taking and giving. And so what I was going to use, since I don't have the mind training like Rays of the Sun, I didn't want to get into the actual teachings that Venerable was going to give, is that I found some old notes from about 10 years ago when Venerable taught on the 37 practices of bodhisattvas, which were written by Tongme Sangpo, a bodhisattva who lived in Tibet in the 1300s. And in the middle of these 37 verses, which take they're basically the entire gradual path to enlightenment from precious human rebirth all the way to enlightenment. In the middle of those verses, verse 12 to 21, deals specifically with transforming adverse circumstances or transforming adversity into the path. And so if we're going to be able to take on the suffering of others, then we need to use those situations in our life that arise, because we're in samsara, is how to take them to cultivate and to strengthen our mind so that we can indeed take on the suffering of others and also destroy the self-centered thought. So they are verses 12 through 21, and I'll just read each of them very quickly. It's mostly what each one of them transforms a particular unfavorable circumstance into the path. And that was almost 13 years ago and these are from notes that I took, and also from Geshe Tekchok's book called Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage. So the first verse is, if someone out of strong desire steals all your wealth or has it stolen, dedicate to him your body, possessions, and your virtue past, present, and future. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this is that's called transforming loss into the path. So you've been robbed, your house has been broken in, your car has been broken in, your purse has been stolen, your wallet's been stolen. And I don't know about you, but I know exactly how I react. I've had this happen a few times in my life, and it's not pretty. Possible reactions are getting furious, getting depressed, getting so upset that you don't even know what to do next. You get paranoid. Lots of ways to respond when our stuff gets stolen. However, Venerable suggestions when looking at this situation. And some of these will, as we go through the verses, some of them are similar. They're sort of the truths of the Dharma that hold well under all circumstances. So the first of the suggestions that she has for this one is to realize that this is karma. We're suffering the results of having stolen from someone previously. See, those who have stolen from us is actually doing us a favor by breaking some of the chains to samsara that wealth and possessions can bind us to. This person is being a friend, doing us a favor, taking those things that we're attached to. Accumulated bad karma from previous lives is like money stored in a bank. With that negative karma ripening in this small way, how kind of the thief to rob us from our negative karma that would have surely ripened in a much worse situation in the future, helped us to be free from it. He is a friend. Fourth suggestion. As bodhisattvas in training, we are promising our possessions to benefit others. So we can imagine our possessions as not truly belonging to us anyway. So visualize giving all of our possessions, especially the ones we're extremely attached to. This frees our mind from miserliness, for sure. The sixth suggestion is to generate compassion for the thief, for the negative karma that is being imprinted on their mind streams will surely ripen. Not only that, but the person who has stole from you is continuing the tendency to steal again, and therefore to bring further suffering on themselves. And then lastly, for this one, is to give our merit and positive potential away. And by giving away all this merit, imagine that it transforms not only their minds, but all sentient beings' minds to create the causes for good rebirths, to meet the Dharma, and qualified teachers, to have curiosity about the Dharma, and to have aspirations to achieve enlightenment. So this was the first of the 10 of them, on transforming when something is stolen from you. Visualizing, giving it away, and being grateful that the karma has ripened in such a small way. The second verse, which is verse 13, which is, even if someone tries to cut off your head when you haven't done a single slightest thing wrong, out of compassion take all her misdeeds upon yourself. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this one is called transforming suffering into the path. If some violence is done to you, this is more about physical violence, something that is unprovoked, whether you get beaten or held up or stabbed or kicked or some sort of violence. So once again, Venerable, taking from the Transforming Adversity into Joy, encouraged by Geshe Tegchop, says there are 4 points under this one. See it once again as a result of your past negativities, past harm we have done to others, and here it is, so why blame them? This one, which has I have found personally helpful over the past year, is seeing the perpetrator as being under the control of their afflictions and karma, out of their minds, as it were, and work on developing compassion towards them. We know the state of suffering that the self-centered mind can put us in. It's like being a sick person, and we all know what it's like to be sick. So anybody who's thinking that by violently, viciously harming somebody is going to alleviate their own suffering or bring them some form of happiness is someone who deserves our compassion, because their minds are not thinking well. And they're in a whole lot of suffering and they don't even know it. Ask to receive the negative karma the person who harmed you has accumulated. So this is where the taking and giving, if you're able to do it, is to take on all the negative karma that the person has accumulated by attacking you, and giving them all of your health, your wealth, your virtue. And point number 4, which is one of those that Venerable every once in a while will insert, is that she makes it very clear that it doesn't mean that we don't take actions if necessary in response to the harm, or to, take care so that we can avoid harm. But what we want to do in the situation is to practice patience, which will help free our minds from the angry mind that gets usually involved in these situations, or the victim way of thinking. And the patience will give us some sort of clarity to know how to respond in a kind and wise way. So it's that whole idea about, now that we're Dharma practitioners, that doesn't mean that we become doormats of the world and don't take action when necessary. Verse number 14 is transforming blame into the path. And this one is, even if someone broadcasts all kinds of unpleasant remarks about you throughout the 3,000 worlds, in return with a loving mind, speak of his good qualities. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this is if someone's going to blame you for something you've done or you haven't done. And so first she stated, at first it's difficult not to criticize someone after you've been blamed for something. It's probably the hardest thing to do. So she said by not trashing them is a good start. So even just keeping our lips zipped in the beginning is a good start. Once again, realizing what we do creates the causes for these harmful things to happen to us. The karma has ripened. This person has blamed you. They're on with their lives. It's complete. It's done. It's over. Count our blessings. Once again, the suffering has come in a small way. Bad-mouthing and blaming others sets the negative karmic imprints in ourselves for future criticism or blame. Number 5 is training the mind to take the blame without getting depressed, without getting down on ourselves, without feeling guilty, thinking that we're bad people. And also will help strengthen our mind, because surely in the future we will be blamed or put down again. So the person is giving us a great opportunity to practice patience and compassion. And the sixth one, which was that I found interesting on this, was everyone has some good qualities, even though they've blamed you. That doesn't cancel out the fact that they have a lot of good qualities. See those qualities, and as it says in here, return with a loving mind, speak of those good qualities. And the thought that came into my mind was, can you imagine in our presidential debates if we were to practice this? Instead of all the finger pointing, blaming, criticizing, is to actually be objective about what it is that we're capable of doing, but also to see the good qualities in the other person. I can't even imagine what our debates would look like. They would be quite profound, probably. Verse 15 is transforming criticism into the path. Though someone may deride and speak bad words about you in a public gathering, looking on her as a spiritual teacher, bow to her with respect. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So seeing a person who's criticizing you as a spiritual teacher, and this is because you want to see their kindness by pointing out your faults, because surely, at least for me, I have a much better ability to see the faults of others, and rarely do I see my own. And doing this in front of a large group has even more power, because then the attachment to reputation is there that you can also work on. So bow to them. Besides, we also have good qualities too. So despite the criticism, that doesn't cancel out our good qualities. And in regards to our spiritual teachers, it's their role to point out our faults as well as to point out our strengths. So when the teacher is pointing out those things we need to work on, remember that they are our spiritual teacher and bow to them with respect. So that one was transforming criticism into the path. Verse 16, which is transforming ingratitude into the path. And this is the one that says, even if a person for whom you cared like a child, like your own child, regard you as an enemy, cherish him specially like a mother does her child who is stricken by sickness. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this is one, and we've had in some of our local talks in Newport, every once in a while we get together with some of our local people, local friends down there, and have these classes. And this is one of those that comes up in a lot of the sharings, is folks have supported and befriended and have been kind to friends and relatives for many years, and then suddenly it seems out of nowhere they turn around and betray them, or they see this friend or this relative as an enemy, and how they're not only shocked, but they don't know what to do except to get furious. And so the suggestions under this one are to see this person who you love, despite the fact that they're seeing you as an enemy, as a child who is sick with a fever and can't control themselves. The suffering is so great that they can't even see their own actions. This is the nature of cyclic existence. Suffering and being so close to it, we don't even realize the harm that we're causing others. Also, it is suggested that it's helpful not to personalize the betrayal. That this is a confused attempt to be happy, and how many times have we hurt others in our attempts to be happy? And sometimes, at least for me, it's almost like it doesn't matter who, it's just like my afflictions say I have to harm somebody today. I'm just in that state of mind, and sometimes it's just somebody just comes passing through the dining room, and it's the affliction's up, and there it goes. And number 3, which is quite interesting, is that it says that the great masters wrote teachings about this very same difficulty, about doing their best to benefit others, to take care of their disciples and their students, to travel long distances to share the Dharma, and then to be betrayed, or to be treated as someone who is to be harmed or to be cast out. So this is not something that happens exclusively to us. Verse 17 is transforming derision into the path. So this is if an equal or inferior person disparages you out of pride, place her as you would your spiritual teacher with respect on the crown of your head. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So someone who is a peer or lower than you in financial, job status, education, they're younger, they're prettier, they're wealthier, or they perceive you as being prettier, more attractive, having more financial status, whether it's true or not, and that they belittle or deride you. This is where jealousy in the mind brings a lot of suffering. This is a perfect opportunity to practice humility and to practice giving up our attachment to reputation. And at this point, Geshe Tegchuk, in the book Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage, lists the 4 points of advice from Mahayana practitioners in regards to transforming belittling, derision into the path. And we've heard these, I was trying to remember, Venerable recently spoke about these. If someone scolds us, we should not scold or speak harshly in return. If someone criticizes us, pointing out faults, real or imagined, making small ones into big ones, we do not return the criticism. If someone strikes us, we do not strike back. If someone gets angry with us, we do not get angry in return. And this is, as Geshe Tegchuk says in his book, a very high-level practice. To be able to not retaliate when harm is done, whether it's verbal harm, physical harm. And the third point under this verse is we can't practice patience with the people who are nice to us. We can only do it with people such as those who belittle, deride, or humiliate us. They give us the circumstances to practice on the path, and so they are precious treasures, precious gems. Verse 18 is transforming ruin into the path. Though you lack what you need and are constantly disparaged, afflicted by dangerous sickness and spirits, without discouragement take on the misdeeds and the pain of all living beings. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Once again, this is specifically giving us the opportunity to practice Tonglen by taking the pain of all living beings. When we are in the middle of samsara, where everything that seems to go wrong does, and where the complaining, victim, whining mind usually takes over. This is where the self-centered thought is at its loudest during these times, where we really feel that our things are not fair, that life is not going well and the challenges are overwhelming. So here Venerable's got 2 very important words of advice with using the commentary in her own wonderful way. Is to practice with small problems, taking on the suffering of others, to destroy the self-centered thought that wants to make the small suffering into a big suffering. Because in the hell realms, the suffering is so great, there will be no space in our minds to practice because the suffering is intense. And if we end up being reborn in a God realm, we will be so blissed out that we will have no interest. We will be so distracted that we will have no opportunity to practice the Dharma. So in this precious human life where we have sufferings, discontent, dissatisfaction, these small sufferings, due to the karma ripening, the negative karma ripening, is to not only be okay and rejoice at the negative karma ripening for ourselves, but then to open our hearts and minds to take on the suffering of all living beings who are probably suffering far greater. And then this is the point where in Venerable's teachings over the past few weeks, you start looking at the hell realms and the God realms, the formless realms, the hungry ghosts, the gods, the demigods, taking on all of their suffering. And by doing this, we keep our courage and compassion, and our mind will grow strong as a result. And this is one of those that happens, well, these all happen almost every day, but this one in particular seems to happen every day. Something is always going wrong. Something that we don't want shows up. something that we're trying to hold on to disappears, or we have to let go of it. So this is, we can count on any of these happening at any time. So verse 19 is transforming wealth into the path. Though you become famous and many bow to you and you gain riches equal to Vashravana's, see that worldly fortune is without essence and be unconceited. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So these are the ways, once again, instead of being arrogant about them and flaunting them and holding them close and wanting more, there's a different way of looking. Having good things in our life can be detrimental to our practice. Not the things themselves, but the attachment to them. Our ego can get overinflated, and pride can arise around the wealth. So in this, the suggestions are this wealth has no essence, is not a sign of whether you are a good person, a good human being or not, and when you die, none of it goes with you. Good fortune is positive karma ripening, plain and simple. Stay neutral around it. Don't get excited, don't sort of invest a lot of time in acquiring more. And instead, generate the true qualities of wealth. Bodhicitta, kindness, patience. This is the real wealth as far as this precious human life goes. And also suggest to cultivate a good motivation in all the everyday things that you do. So despite whatever good fortune you have, which I know from my own mind that I get complacent and I get kind of comfortable and I get secure and I get kind of spaced out when things are going really well, is to continually think about my motivation on the good fortune that I have and how in some way I can benefit or share the good fortune that I have, share the good things that I have, rather than wanting to find ways to hold on or to acquire. And then to continually to stay true to my Dharma practice, to stay humble in my reputation, and to stay very neutral to the wealth. So this one I found very, to see bodhicitta, kindness, patience, love as the wealth that we have. The wealth that we can cultivate, and that we have absolutely no limits to the amount of wealth that we can acquire. Let's try to acquire as much bodhicitta, kindness, and patience as we can. Verse number 20 is, while the enemy of your own anger is unsubdued, though you conquer external foes, they will only increase. Therefore, with the militia of love and compassion, subdue your own mind. Transforming anger into the path. That's verse 20. And this is also one that's going to inevitably, at least for me, show up in almost daily. There are many disadvantages of being angry. There are chapters. Venerable has written a book on working with anger. But the most important truth about it is that it gets in the way of our happiness. It brings the opposite result of what we want, destroys all the good karma, and impedes the ripening of any positive karma that we may have stored in our mind streams. The fourth point, as long as we have anger in our minds, we will always have enemies and difficulties in our lives. So this is the whole point. Though we conquer external foes, they will only increase. So as long as we not only don't deal with the anger in our own minds, but we perceive the cause of all of our anger from outside, we will never be able to handle the difficulties nor ever make peace with our lives. And our own anger will cause us greater suffering than any enemy that we've ever faced. So this is one of those universal truths, is that the state of anger that we find ourselves in, we're so caught up in the suffering of that the enemy has long gone, has left our lives, has walked away, and we're still in a place as if they were still standing there. We were still yelling and screaming at each other, or they were in our presence. Use love and compassion to destroy the anger on the inside, and all enemies will be vanquished. Now once again, just as a little point, is that all of these transformational practices are things that come over time with lots of familiarity, a lot of practice, a lot of patience, a lot of trial and error. There will be many times where we won't remember them. There will be times when we will remember them, but it'll be too late. There will be many times when we will remember them and then we'll forget them in the middle of the situation. And there will be times when we will remember them. We'll remember them well. So there is a process as far as transforming unfavorable conditions into the path. And then the last one is verse 21, which is transforming desire into the path. And that is sensual pleasures like salt water. The more you indulge, the more thirst increases. Abandon at once those things which breed clinging attachment. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this last one is transforming desire into the path, and since we live in the desire realm, this is something that we have an opportunity to work on every moment of our lives. This one is about attachment, which can be very subtle. Attachment is something that brings quite pleasurable experiences and makes us happy in the beginning. And once again, Venerable has, on the commentary, says that it's not the pleasures of this life that are a problem, but the attachment to them that is. We can give up the object, but unless the craving is addressed, the attachment is addressed, the desire will remain. Once again, here Venerable recommends checking our motivation when the attachment arises with the question, why do I want what I want right now? And to be honest about the answer. Is there something going on a deeper level of our minds that we want to be distracted by an object of attachment? And usually from the times that I've been able to get underneath my attachment, I find that there's sort of this soft open-heartedness that maybe needs some support, maybe needs some friendship, maybe has gotten a little, the self-centered thought has gotten a little bored, or the Dharma is bringing up something that I really need to look at that I am unwilling to look at. So the attachment distracts me. There are 3 types of attachment. This is kind of a new thing for me, but it certainly is true. For the past, there's nostalgia. So for the things that we were attached to that once were. And I see this a lot in elderly people. And I think part of it is that the mind, when we get quite a bit older, has better memories about long time ago things and less memory about short time things. And so there's this going back to the past and thinking about when I was a child and when I was first married and my first time I ever went to wherever. And so there's a lot of nostalgia, which this form of attachment will put us into living in the past and not living in the present. The second one is attachment for the present, which is all the things in the desire realm we have: food, clothes, music. We want to hold on to these objects or experience them as much as we can. So there's a little bit on my notes I had next to attachment for the present was protection, that we get into wanting to keep it, and so we have this little bit of a protective mechanism around our attachment in the present. And then in the future, it's fantasizing. I can't wait. We hope what will happen, make up all sorts of things that probably won't happen. And so there is a fantasizing, which is an attachment into the future. And during the course of the day, I've found that I can go into any of these 3 kinds of attachment almost well, not quite simultaneously, but they seem to be instantaneous. And then the last point on this is that to transform desire into the path is a gradual process. We can't force ourselves to do it with a judgmental, critical, or guilty mind, but with the wisdom that sees how attachment brings misery. So we slowly learn the antidotes and keep a healthy distance from the things that cause our attachment to run wild. So I think the word is balance, also keeping a life that's simple, and to cultivate the mind of contentment with what we have. So that is pretty much, and these verses were, I have always found them helpful, and now that we chant this 37 practices of bodhisattvas during lunch at the Abbey, and we have shared some of the ways that we've used these verses in transforming our own lives by using the Dharma, that as Venerable goes on through these teachings, the part of transforming unfavorable conditions will come up in the teachings. And so this was just my wanting to share the things that I find helpful, because I find sometimes where I get caught up is that I keep forgetting that whatever I practice and come to an understanding on the cushion, if I don't bring that off the cushion into my life at the Abbey and life outside of the Abbey, is that it's always going to stay in my head and I'm never going to be able to get it down into my heart. And by having the teachings and having verses and having notes that have these little gems to remind me, provided that I go back to them and look, is that as I went over these notes and thought about these again, I realized that over the past 13 years, although it hasn't been a great improvement, I've noticed that by listening to these teachings and reciting the chants a few times a week, that I've been able to see some small improvements on how I've taken difficult situations in my life, living here, living the past 13 years, and how I've used them to open up my heart, to subdue, if not, certainly not to eliminate, but to subdue the self-centered thought, and to cultivate a kindness towards others, and wishing them well, and wishing them to have all the good things that they so much deserve by simply being sentient beings who the Buddha loves, cares for, wishes the best for, and spend all of their time benefiting. And so if the Buddhas can do that for sentient beings, I want to be able to cultivate that kind of mind that treats them just as preciously as the Buddhas do. And I find that using these transformative verses and these teachings on those days where I don't feel anything like that helps me to grow a stronger, more courageous mind. And by doing so, hopefully one day Buddhahood. And until then, some good tools for repaying the immeasurable kindness that we've all received from all living beings. So next week, Venerable will return, and we'll see where we go with mind training like rays of the sun. But this was just a little insertion for this week. So have a wonderful week. Practice. Be kind. Be realistic. And ask for support from your friends if you need. And may all beings benefit from our efforts in the Dharma.